Now then. If you're expecting a bonk buster, this isn't for you. There's no bonks. There are very few busts. One little problem I've had with Always You Edina, which was totally unforeseen, is that friends have rung me up and said that they can't find Always You Edina. Which, you know, rather translates into Always You, an excessive accumulation of fluid tissue, which is still a win-win situation, because I can always go places. I can either go somewhere and talk about the novel, or I can talk about my swollen ankle. All is not lost. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. This is the first London reading, the first actual reading from Always You Edina, and just a very little bit about the story. It's set in Birmingham in the 1960s, and the heroine is Bonnie, and she's 10 years old. There's another section where she looks back on her life when she's older, but basically she has heroines, and her heroines are Joanna Bayliss, the most popular girl in her school, who doesn't like her at all, but I think, you know, we've all been through that. I certainly have, and still am going through that. I see somebody, and as soon as they don't like me, I think they're great. It's not been a happy life. So, anyway, she also loves her Aunt Ed, the Edina of the title. And this little piece I'm going to read is where, for the first time, she realises she sees her Aunt Ed as not quite the wonderful person she'd imagined her to be. It's Bonnie's 11th birthday. Her Aunt Ed have come with her husband, Uncle Brian, and Bonnie's cousin Susan. They've come to the birthday party. Now, this is set in Birmingham, working class Birmingham in the 60s. Bonnie has told her cousin Susan that she could fly, which is also, has anybody ever told anyone they could fly? Well, what always happens is if you tell someone you can fly, they'll test you. Susan tests Bonnie by pushing her down the stairs. So this is just after this. It's evening and they come upstairs. I hadn't said a word to Susan for almost 6 hours. Annoyingly, Susan had made no attempt to speak to me either. It wasn't very satisfying sending my cousin to Coventry if she didn't realise she'd been sent. Also, I had the niggling worry that perhaps she might have sent me to Coventry. As we changed into our pyjamas in my bedroom, I was almost ready to say something, just so she might be forced to say something back, and then I might get my chance to snub her. "Does your bum ache?" Susan asked, which was so surprising I immediately answered, "Yes, it does." She climbed into the put-you-up bed. "Sorry, but you did say you could fly." "You know, Bonnie, your bedroom's so much nicer than mine." This time I was surprised into saying, "Do you think so?" "Of course." She settled herself against the pillow and studied my room. "I just like it a lot." Her voice wasn't quite her usual confident one. Not envious either, more sad, as if she was missing out on something. I removed Susan from Coventry and got into my bed. "What did you think of my birthday party?" I asked. Well, it wasn't what I'd call a proper birthday party. Why weren't there any paper hats or a birthday cake? The ice sponge was my birthday cake. But nobody even sang happy birthday. "They forgot," I said. "Do you think your mum was very bored?" "I expect so," she said. "Why does your mum look so miserable?" "I don't know. Gran's friend, Miss Venables, didn't say much, but she gave me 10 shillings. Did she? I thought she looked like she got a stick stuck up her bottom. We both giggled. I helped my mum choose your handbag, Susan said. Do you really like it? I love it. I've never had a handbag before. It's real leather, pinks and mod colour. Is it? I wriggled my toes under the light weight of my patchwork blanket. Suddenly I was very happy. My room seemed as snug as I'd hoped it would. Bonnie, Susan said, can you really fly? Of course I can. Then why didn't you, when I pushed you down the stairs? I couldn't be bothered. I ignored her. Suddenly her head and shoulders appeared over the side of my bed. You can't fly, can you? She started tickling my neck under my ear. The door opened. Mum said, Susan, get back into bed. I can't sleep, Auntie Eileen. Bonnie's making me laugh. Bonnie, pack it in, it's getting late. Are my mum and dad still here, Susan said. They'll be off in half an hour, and if you're not asleep by then, they can take you with them. That's not a bad idea, Susan said. Don't be cheeky. Susan climbed back into the put-you-up bed and Mum closed the door. We listened to her retreating footsteps. Downstairs, as she went into the front room, there was a burst of conversation and laughter. For a few minutes we lay quietly. Had Susan fallen asleep? I held my breath and waited. Then out of the orange gloom came a low, saucy voice, more like Aunt Ed's than Susan. What are you waiting for, Bonnie? What do you mean? Why don't you come into my bed? Your bed's uncomfortable. Then shall I get in with you? Silence stretched between us before I heard her quietly pushing back the covers and moving stealthily across the floorboards between us. What are you waiting for? She said again, her breath warm against my face. I don't understand, I said. She put her hand on the waistband of my pyjamas and stretched the elastic. Then she let go so that it snapped against my skin. That's what my mum says to my dad, she said. They think I'm asleep. Mum opens his bedroom door and says, what are you waiting for? Sometimes she calls him Big Boy. Well, he is a big chap, I said. No, she's talking about his tinky. His what? My voice came out as a squeak. His tinky. Men have tinkies, we have minkies. That's disgusting. I squeezed my knees and thighs together to hold on to the spasm of excitement. What does he say when she says that? Susan laughed. Usually, Ed, go back to bed, please. Susan walked her fingers over my pyjama jacket, probing between the buttons. Susan suck titty, she said. I gasped, excited but embarrassed as well. Titty was a rude private word I'd heard Gran use a few times, always to be shushed by Mum. Suck, a word never used at all except in connection with boiled sweets. Susan opened 2 buttons and stroked my chest. I undid the rest of my buttons. I was so hot. I felt like a bright red balloon stretching bigger and tighter. Yum yum, Susan said. She giggled. I groaned. And then I froze. Over Susan's head, I saw my bedroom door swing open. Frantically, I pushed her head aside. I haven't finished. I want to see if there really is a bruise on your bottom, she said. She tried to slide her fingers into my pyjama trousers, and then she felt my fear, and she looked where I was looking, at Aunt Ed standing in the doorway, holding her red winkle picker shoes in her hand. Mum, Susan whispered. Aunt Ed switched on the light. She smiled at us. She put her shoes down on the floor and stepped into them. Her lips were slightly parted, her eyes huge, no colour in them except black. Suddenly, as if somewhere in the house a starting pistol had been fired, Aunt Ed sprinted the few feet between us. Susan clung to me, I tried to hold her, but I was no match for a furious Aunt Ed. She grabbed hold of the neck of Susan's pyjama jacket, and as if Susan weighed no more than a rag doll, lifted her off the bed before dropping her. Susan sprawled face down on the floor. "You dirty little beast," Aunt Ed screamed, her red shoes taking on a life of their own, the sharply pointed toes hammering into my cousin's shoulder blades and back. And then my dad was in the room. On the floor, Susan was trying to crawl under my bed, one arm shielding her face. "Don't, Mummy," she whimpered. Dad scooped Susan up, using his body as a shield from Aunt Ed. She pummeled his back, yelling, "Put her down, she's my daughter." Aunt Ed's spittle sprayed the back of Dad's shirt. "Calm down, Ed," he said, "calm down." My dad sounded completely calm, as if he was absent-mindedly quieting a wild animal, and then he was out of the door. For a second, Dad and the bundle that was Susan were framed against the light from the stairwell. The light was blotted out as Aunt Ed rushed after them, her arms raised, her hands clenched into fists. I heard the noise they made racing down the stairs, Dad's slippered feet thumping, Aunt Ed's shoes pattering, but a furious, chasing pattering. Thank you.